Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by Thad Greenson, North Coast Journal's news editor, and Jennifer Fermico Cahill, the arts and features editor. Welcome, guys.
Hey, David, how you doing?
Oh, I've been better. It was a late night. Yesterday was election day, and it still seems like the same day. There was a nap in between. Hopefully you guys are hanging in there.
I am running on fumes myself.
I'm like 75% coffee and, 25% concealer right now.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can relate. I think I've had more coffee recently than I've had in the last month. But so I think maybe this is a good time to ask that. What are you guys covering this week, and maybe give us some feedback about your election coverage.
Yeah. So I guess we'll give a brief rundown of kind of where things stand as I want to say the dust settles, but nothing has really settled. Right. A handful of hours out from polls closing. So in Humboldt County, we have about almost half of registered voters having had their ballots counted. I think our last tally was almost 42,000 votes had been counted. The vast majority of those were ballots that arrived, vote-by-mail ballots that arrived at the elections office well before Election Day. The first tally that they posted last night was 36,000 ballots, and then they had 3 updates with about 2,000 each of ballots that were counted, or ballots that were cast at the polls. So actually people who went and turned in their vote-by-mail ballot and cast a precinct ballot. So the big question is, how many votes are left to count, right, and when will we know? And we don't have answers to that at the moment. We have some guesses. Our reporters are actually working right now trying to get on the horn with the elections office to get an estimate of what types of ballots and how many of each are left. But our best guess at the moment is that there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 ballots, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, remaining to be counted in Humboldt County. Anecdotally, we've heard from everybody that it just feels like a record turnout. Kelly Sanders, the elections office, the registrar of voters, is just blown away by the amount of both vote-by-mail returns and then amount of action at kind of the polling centers, not just on Election Day, but on the few days they were open prior. So what we know for sure is that on Monday she told us her office had received 47,000 vote-by-mail ballots already. And that they were going to try to count all those before Election Day. The first return on Election Day only had 36,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. So we know for sure that there's about 10,000 vote-by-mail ballots that were already at the elections office that have not yet been counted. And then we figure, on a typical election day, there's usually 2,000-3,000 vote-by-mail ballots that are turned in at the polls on Election Day that don't wind up in those Election Day tallies and are counted later. And then, some hundreds up to 1,000 provisional ballots that are cast at the polls from people whose registration status was uncertain, or in the case of this pandemic election, lost their vote-by-mail ballot and couldn't get it verified that they hadn't voted. For some reason, their vote was a little bit in question, so they cast a provisional ballot. So our best guess is, like I said, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 ballots outstanding at this point. But that, I just want to stress to everybody that is a guess. We really do not know.
So based on what you've told us, it sounds like they knew going into yesterday there was already, going to probably be record turnout because so many mail-in ballots were received early. Mm-hmm. They processed as much as they could, but then they did the same day processing into the wee hours last night. I think the most recent update was around 3 a.m. Mm-hmm. And you guys have now been able to sort of unbake the cake a little bit and kind of figure out what's still out there, but it's just a best guess. Do you have a sense of when we expect to get another update or some what appears to be more finalized numbers?
Yeah, so we won't get finalized numbers for some time, probably a couple weeks. The best hope, I would say, is that by the end of the week or maybe the weekend, we start to get additional batches of returns coming back. The elections office, by statute, has certain things it needs to do to kind of audit the election day tallies before it can move on to processing and counting other new ballots. And so basically, they're going to do a 1% recount of all the races on the ballot, which needs to be done. And then there's other auditing of just election equipment that has come back to make sure that everything went out, gets returned, and that kind of thing. So that usually takes, a few days. And then when it comes to absentee ballots, there's a more rigid verification process for those than for people who show up in the polls. And so take some time just to physically open them, take them out of the envelopes, check signatures, all that kind of thing, sort them. And then provisional ballots, it's kind of the same thing. So realistically, if we get another batch of returns Friday, Saturday, I'd consider that pretty good. But we probably won't have, unofficial final numbers for at least a week, probably two, would be my guess.
So a lot of the questions that came into, I guess, me or us on the coverage last night, and then some still today, you addressed just now. So there is an audit in place automatically by statute. There's a process for verifying these provisional ballots. The machines are checked just to make sure they're functioning properly. And then most importantly, this is normal. It's normal that we will take days and weeks to come up with a finalized number.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. What's different about this is just the number of ballots outstanding. But, on a typical election day, I'm kind of guessing here, but I would say that about a third of the ballots come in before election day in vote by mail form. We get another third or so get another third or so on election day, and then there's maybe a third that trickle in. Whereas I think here we're looking at more half and half, or maybe even more than that.
Gotcha. Well, cool. Thank you for that. Do you want anything else you want to add about what the preliminary results are, or do you want to just save that for folks going online to check it out?
I mean, as far as the preliminary results, I would say that there's some interesting stuff. Every one of the 9 ballot measures in Humboldt County is on track to pass right now. When it comes to propositions, state propositions, there's some interesting contrasts between how Humboldt County voted and how the state voted. And then there's some pretty, tight races for city council seats and the 2nd District Humboldt County Supervisor. It's weird that this is the first time since I've been at the Journal that we published the election results without picking any winners, without saying, we think this person is a shoo-in at this point, just because there's so many outstanding ballots. And so the races are really going to fluctuate and move here over the next week, or at least we expect that there's that potential.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for that. And we'll keep ourselves on the hook here and check out North Coast Journal for results. And also, just so you guys know, the County Elections Office does publish this as soon as they release them, so that you're getting them from their online site also. Is that right?
Yep.
Or do they send them to you?
No, we're getting. We're sign up for their automatic email thing, cool. But really, we're like everybody else, sitting there on election night, hitting refresh over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Which now, at least this year, the entire country was with you. It wasn't just journalists staying up all night, freaking out and hitting refresh. It was everyone. So a little togetherness.
A little community. Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah, we're bonding. Well, speaking of bonding, I guess, the camaraderie of the election stress. Thad, you are covering a story that also segues into election season somewhat about gun purchases in our community. You want to tell us what you found out?
Yeah, so we have a story in this week's edition about just this enormous spike in gun sales in Humboldt County. Not just in the few weeks leading up to the election, although it seems like there was a kind of a secondary spike then, but really since the pandemic began. And so the story began. I was reading. I can't actually remember what publication it was, but it was a national publication talking about how this has been like a record year for gun and ammo sales in the United States due to a variety of factors. And I just kind of was like, that's interesting. In Humboldt County, we own lots of guns and unfortunately have lots of gun deaths as well. So I just thought it was a story that maybe I could localize. And so I called around to a handful of gun shops and really quickly realized, wow, this is absolutely a real thing locally. So I ended up talking to 2 gun shop owners who agreed to kind of be quoted on the record, a couple who would talk to me just on background, and then a bunch who just kind of wanted to get off the phone with me as quickly as possible. Yeah. But the two that really, were forthcoming, Aaron Ostrom at Pacific Outfitters and Greg Rice, who owns Bucksport, along with his brother, said that this is just basically a year unlike anything they've ever seen, and that gun sales really started to spike at the time that the pandemic hit and shelter in place came into play, and that there's this even before the lead up to the election, there was this just kind of unique, coalescing of factors, this perfect storm that drove demand. And so one of the things I thought was interesting is, much like with everything else, COVID has really disrupted the supply chain for firearms and ammunition manufacturing. And so kind of like the toilet paper scenario where people went into the grocery store and saw a bare shelf and thought, oh my goodness, I need toilet paper. I need to stock up and get all the toilet paper I can. The same thing is happening with firearms and ammunition.
Wow.
And so, they're reporting that they basically, as soon as they get handgun ammunition on the shelves, it's gone within hours. They have people calling from outside the area looking to purchase firearms and ammunition because there's been such a run on gun shops, especially in kind of more urban areas. And so, one guy, Greg at Bucksport, said that he has a guy who calls him from the East Bay, and basically comes up every 30 days to buy a handgun because there's a 30-day waiting period in California between handgun purchases. And so he's come up 4 times, driven up to buy a handgun in Eureka and then driven back wherever his home is in the East Bay. So it's kind of wild. And then, and then on top of COVID, they said that the other kind of contributing factors have been, the civil unrest and social justice movements and the backlashes to them in the wake of George Floyd's death in Minneapolis. And then the lead up to the election and kind of widespread fears that there'd be crazy civic chaos in the aftermath, either with armed militias or, crazy protests and stuff like that.
So thank you for all that. And I do, one other element of this is I do recall, and I think I saw it in your story also, that typically when there's a Democratic candidate that looks like they might win the presidency or I guess control of one of the branches of the Congress, that there's just this natural tendency for people to think that their Second Amendment rights might be at risk. So this was the perfect storm where that was also a contributing factor this time around. Any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, typically what I've heard is that these kind of spikes in gun sales are generally driven by that fear that there's going to be gun control measures put into place. And so, the folks I talked to said it's really typical for after a mass shooting for there to be a run on certain types of guns. Like you said, whenever there's a pro-gun control candidate that is seems to be a front runner. And so Aaron at Pacific Outfitters said, kind of the biggest rush on guns that he'd seen was Obama's election in 2008. And he'd made, comments about people clinging to their guns and stuff like that. It was widely, I think fairly outspoken on some gun control measures. And so there was just a massive run then. And he said that this just kind of blows it out of the water because that dynamic is very evident, is very present, that Biden was favored in the lead up to the election day. So people had that fear, but he said it's just like that times 10, because usually, when there's a rush on guns, there's kind of one of these factors. And here, we have, 10 all of a sudden. It's, yeah.
So you also spoke with Sheriff Hansel about sort of his observations and experiences throughout this, I guess, run on guns, so to speak.
Yeah, so concealed carry permits, concealed weapons permits go through the sheriff's office in California, the local sheriff's office. And so I just reached out to him kind of saying, have you seen an uptick? And they absolutely have, which, given what the gun shop owner said, isn't terribly surprising. But they, basically I think they're seeing an uptick of about 25% or 30% this year, which, is significant, especially considering, they weren't issuing them for a period because of COVID and there was restrictions on classes and stuff like that. But the more interesting thing I thought was that he said there's been a really large uptick in first-time applicants. people who are getting a concealed carry permit for the first time. And that really jives with what, what the gun shop owners told me, is that while there's been some, brisk movement in rifle sales and stuff like that, there's just a lot of people really concerned about home protection, personal protection. Aaron Ostrom, who teaches classes on gun safety, said that, out of nowhere, kind of this year, for the first time, he's getting a lot of questions about, like, how do I defend myself in a riot or kind of a mass protest chaos event and stuff like that. So it really paints the picture that people are just on edge and really worried about civility reigning in the streets.
So it's good to hear that our sheriff is got a finger on the pulse a little bit, and also that the safety classes are a requirement, and that people are taking the opportunity to get trained, and I guess they have to. But so it's like in addition to seeing all the ammunition getting taken off the shelves, at least people are getting trained and seem to be doing this legally, or at least there's an uptick anyway. So thank you for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
right on. We're going to transition now over to you, Jennifer. What are you covering this week in the Arts and Features beat?
Well, last night, I was saying before we did this broadcast, I was on Facebook looking at what people were doing to kind of get through the stress of election night or election week, month, whatever this turns out to be.
Yeah, right.
The election solstice, the longest night of the year. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of people were drinking, and I noticed everybody was at home. But this is one of those things where normally, like, people go to watch the election at a bar. That used to be like a thing. And I was thinking about that a lot today. But I spoke to some folks this week who have been tending bar since Humboldt moved into the yellow zone and opened up bars that don't serve food. So previously, you could go to a bar. If you owned a bar that also was a restaurant, like Six Rivers Brewery, you could open up and you could sell alcohol, and you could even sell alcohol to go because of the ABC's loosened restrictions on that during the pandemic. Allowing people to have more of a to-go friendly business. You could do that, but you had to be selling food too. You couldn't just go to Six Rivers Brewery and get a pint. You had to also maybe get, may I suggest, the fried chicken. So, but now we're in this other tier where places like the Shanty, which no longer has the Shanty dog, RIP. The Shanty has, mostly just alcohol sales. So same thing with, places on like Everett's or, places where you're just going in to normally sit at the bar and drink. Some of them stayed closed. For example, Ernie's, Champagne on Tap at Ernie's stayed closed and continues to do so. However, even those bars that opened back up, it's not like it used to be. And so I looked into some of the regulations and what it's like for bartenders who are working now. And I talked to a couple of people. One, Jeannie Noggle, who is over at Six Rivers Brewery, but she used to be apparently a bouncer at Everett's, which is kind of, I got to talk to her about that. Yeah. But also, she's worked at Mad River Brewing Company. I talked to Mike Vidiello from Shanty. Mike, former best bartender, Humboldt's best of winner from the North Coast Journal. Anyway, I talked to them about what it's like working now and kind of what you should do if you decide to go out to drink in bars. First of all, it's really important that you remember that just because something is allowed doesn't mean it's your safest move. Yeah. The restrictions are to reduce exposure, reduce the transmission of the virus. They do not make it so that you cannot contract the virus while you're out and about. So right now, if you walk into a bar, 3 journalists walk into a bar, and first thing you need to look for is nobody can be at the bar. The bar itself, the bar counter, where once you love to put up an elbow and, slide a glass across, is now closed. It cannot be open. If you walk into a place and you see people drinking at the bar or mingling in groups, standing up, hanging out at the bar, get out. Get out of the house. Yeah. It's at least not compliant. Also, There should be tables separated, just like for restaurants, at least 6 feet apart, and you need to be staying at the tables as a patron. When you get up to go to the bathroom, to go do whatever, you need to put on your mask. The only time your mask can be off is when you are sitting, eating, or drinking. So if you see people sort of congregating, moving from table to table, chatting as we once did long ago, when dinosaurs roamed the earth and there was no pandemic, that is a sign that we are not in compliance. And it's really important that patrons kind of remember that, because not everybody is going to call a tip line. Not every bartender, as much as bartenders and servers are often the most visible people, and you think, oh, the bartender was doing this, the bartender was doing that, or they're usually not the people who are making the policy decisions. And that's an important thing to remember when you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't want to get anybody in trouble by calling the tip line. You might be, in fact, informing an owner that they don't understand the rules that they need to be following, or you might be speaking up for somebody who can't speak up for fear of losing their job. I did speak to at least one person who was really not feeling super confident about that. And I've spoken to a lot of, service industry people over the years who don't feel like they can always say when OSHA rules aren't being followed, when labor rules aren't being followed, because you can be fired like that. And right now it's a pandemic, so you don't want to be jobless. But the main tips that I got from our bartenders were, number one, wear your mask. We're 8 months in. Jeannie Noggle was like, it's been 8 months. You either have a mask, or no, you have a mask, right?
Yeah.
If you had to go, pick up your paycheck or do whatever, you wore a mask, so you can do it when you come to a bar. The next thing was, as Mike put it, we're here trying to give you a good time. You can maybe do the same. Be respectful and patient to the staff. They did not vote to make COVID come into the county and, shut down everything. They would like to be earning what they used to earn pre-COVID, believe me. But these are the rules. If they want to stay open and keep their alcohol licenses, these are the rules they have to follow. I asked Mike, I was like, so what happens if people don't follow the rules? And he just gave me this sort of smoker's chuckle into the phone. But in fact, you're asked to leave. And you don't want to get 86th from a bar in this small a town. We have so few bars left at this point. You really need to be cultivating your regular status if you are going to be going to bars. But another thought, just throwing it out there, takeout drinks are still available almost every place. You can get a mason jar or 2 or 3. No one's judging, and take them to go. You can get cocktails, you can get pints, you can get all that stuff because the ABC has relaxed these regulations. And you can just get drunk at home on your couch where you don't need to call an Uber, where you can just chill and watch the election results not come in. And in fact, when I asked Mike, he was like, I said, what do you do when you go to bars? And he said, I'm not going.
Yeah, so that's telling, actually. And so one other element of your story had to do with just the social distancing aspect and how some of these establishments are managing that. Do you you want to tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, something that is kind of an in-between stage between indoor bars, tables 6 feet apart, and taking it to go. Some bars have an outdoor option. For example, like Shanty and Six Rivers Brewery, they both have outdoor. And in fact, Shanty is not doing any indoor seating now. So I'm sorry, you cannot go and sit on the stool, the very stool where I once watched Sharktopus with the sound off, and it was the best night of my life. But they do have an outdoor patio that is soon getting an awning. And winter. a number of bars like Richard's Goat Tavern and Tea Room has set up a really great outdoor patio. There are a bunch of places. Call your favorite bar that you miss. If you really feel like you need to go and be at a bar, call and ask about their setup, call and ask about what they're doing, and know before you go. And then once you're there, follow the rules.
And tip well.
So well.
Well, right on. Words to live by. Thank you for that. Report from the field. You did the research, the recon for anybody who needs or prefers to get out there and get some drinks and socially distancing, socializing. This is great. Well, that's about going to do it for us this week. North Coast Journal is available online and also at newsstands. Get one now. Stay informed. You guys, till next time, thank you very much, Thad and Jennifer. Take care, and fingers crossed that we make it through the zombie apocalypse election week. And I'll talk to you guys again soon.
Yeah, get some sleep.
Bye, guys.